The morning sunlight filtered through the precision-cut blinds of Elena Varga's craftsman-style home, casting geometric shadows across the kitchen's marble countertops. Outside, her rose garden, a meticulously cultivated masterpiece that had won local gardening competitions 3 years running, stood as a testament to her patience and skill. Each bush was a carefully pruned work of art, a living canvas that told stories of careful cultivation and generational wisdom passed down from her Romanian grandmother. The certified letter lay on the kitchen island like a ticking time bomb, its official seal mocking her years of dedication to the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. Elena's fingers, calloused from years of gardening and typing investigative stories, traced the embossed Oakwood Terrace Homeowners Association letterhead. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the violation notice, her journalistic training kicking in as she analyzed every carefully worded sentence. Violation of Section 4, Paragraph C, Landscaping Height Restrictions, the letter proclaimed in sterile bureaucratic language. The infraction: her beloved rose bushes exceeded the prescribed maximum height by precisely 2 inches. 2 inches that represented generations of horticultural passion, 2 inches that spoke to the resilience of carefully cultivated beauty. Michael, her husband of 20 years, watched from the doorway. A retired military intelligence officer, he recognized the familiar spark in Elena's eyes, the same look she'd get when uncovering a particularly challenging story during her years as an investigative journalist. His weathered hands cradled a steaming mug of coffee, a silent offer of support. "They're at it again," Elena muttered, her voice a mixture of frustration and something deeper, a simmering resolve that had been building for years. Oakwood Terrace hadn't always been a battleground of petty regulations and suburban power plays. When they first moved in 15 years ago, the neighborhood had seemed like a slice of American dream perfection. Perfectly manicured lawns, weekend block parties, children riding bicycles on immaculate sidewalks. But perfection, Elena had learned, came with a suffocating price tag of conformity. The rose bushes were more than just plants. They were a living connection to her past. Her grandmother, Elena Popescu, had brought the original rose cuttings from Romania, survivors of war, displacement, and countless family migrations. Each bush told a story of resilience, of beauty thriving against impossible odds. The specific variety, a rare hybrid tea rose with deep crimson petals and an impossibly complex fragrance, was the last living connection to her family's homeland. Michael crossed the kitchen, his military-trained movements precise yet gentle. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, knowing full well that Elena was already 3 mental steps ahead of the HOA. She spread the violation notice on the kitchen counter, her investigative journalist's mind already mapping out potential strategies. The HOA had a history of selective enforcement, targeting specific homeowners while overlooking similar violations elsewhere. This wasn't just about rose bushes. This was about power, control, and the subtle mechanisms of suburban governance. "They picked the wrong homeowner this time," Elena said, a dangerous glint entering her eyes. The same determination that had helped her expose corporate corruption during her journalism career now focused on the Oakwood Terrace Homeowners Association. Michael chuckled, a sound that was part amusement, part battle-hardened recognition. "Shall I put on some coffee? This feels like the beginning of something." Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Make it strong. We're going to need it." Little did the HOA know, but this violation notice was about to become the first shot in a suburban war, a conflict that would reshape not just their neighborhood, but potentially how homeowners associations operated across the country. The rose bushes swayed gently outside the window, as if whispering their own silent rebellion. The Caffeine Collective wasn't your typical neighborhood coffee shop. Nestled between a boutique yoga studio and an artisanal bakery in the strip mall just outside Oakwood Terrace, it was a sanctuary for those who didn't quite fit the perfect suburban mold. Its exposed brick walls were adorned with local artwork, pieces that often pushed the boundaries of conventional taste, much like the clientele who frequented the establishment. Elena arrived precisely at 10:17 a.m., her messenger bag carefully positioned to conceal a high-end digital recorder and a notebook with pages of meticulously organized notes. She ordered her usual a pour-over Ethiopian single-origin coffee, black, and settled into her favorite corner table. From here, she could observe the entire cafe while appearing to be just another work-from-home professional checking emails. Sandra Martinez was already waiting, her collection of modern art sculpture catalogs spread across the table like a tactical battle plan. Her fingers, adorned with rings that looked more like miniature architectural sculptures, drummed an anxious rhythm against her ceramic mug. "They took them," Sandra said the moment Elena sat down, her voice a controlled whisper that barely masked her fury. "All 3 sculptures, removed from my front yard, claimed they violated some obscure landscaping ordinance about 3-dimensional objects interrupting visual plane." Elena knew Sandra's story well. The sculptures were more than art. They were Sandra's life's work. A renowned sculptor who had exhibitions in major museums, she had created site-specific pieces that blended architectural design with emotional landscape. Her front yard had been her most personal canvas, a living exhibition that challenged the sterile uniformity of Oakwood Terrace. The HOA's action was more than a violation. It was cultural suppression. As they spoke, other regulars of the Caffeine Collective began to drift in. Robert Chin, an environmental engineer who had battled the HOA over his solar panel installation, joined their table. His story was a familiar one: innovative technology deemed aesthetically inappropriate by board members who understood neither sustainability nor design. "I've been documenting everything," Elena said, sliding a heavily encrypted external hard drive across the table. Years of investigative journalism had taught her the value of thorough documentation. Every violation notice, every communication, every inconsistent enforcement. Michael's military intelligence training had helped her develop a secure communication network, encrypted messaging apps, carefully curated contact lists, and a system of information sharing that would make most intelligence agencies proud. What had started as individual frustrations was slowly transforming into a coordinated resistance. Robert pulled out his own collection of documents, engineering reports, solar efficiency studies, detailed logs of HOA communications. "They're not just stopping innovation," he explained. "They're actively preventing environmental progress. My solar installation would have reduced neighborhood energy consumption by 22%. But apparently, that's less important than maintaining a uniform aesthetic." The conversation flowed like their coffee, rich, complex, with undertones of frustration and hints of potential revolution. Each story added another layer to the growing narrative of HOA overreach. Elena began to see a pattern. This wasn't just about individual violations. It was a systematic approach to community control, a bureaucratic mechanism designed to suppress individuality and creativity. The HOA wasn't protecting property values. They were manufacturing a sterile, lifeless version of suburban existence. "We need a platform," she said quietly, her journalist's instinct kicking into high gear. "A way to document and share these stories. Something anonymous but powerful." By the time their coffee cups were empty, a plan had begun to take shape. The Caffeine Collective had become more than a meeting place. It was the nerve center of a suburban rebellion. Outside, the perfectly manicured lawns of Oakwood Terrace seemed to wait, unaware that beneath their uniform green surfaces, a revolution was brewing. The basement of Elena and Michael's craftsman home had transformed into a high-tech command center that would have impressed her husband's former military intelligence colleagues. Multiple monitors lined one wall, each displaying a different stream of information: social media archives, property records, business registrations, and a carefully constructed database of HOA interactions. Richard Holloway, the Oakwood Terrace HOA board president, had no idea he was about to become the subject of the most thorough investigation of his life. Elena's fingers danced across the keyboard, each keystroke a precision strike in her digital reconnaissance mission. Her years as an investigative journalist had taught her that every public figure had a story hidden beneath the surface. And Richard Holloway was no exception. The first breadcrumb came from a seemingly innocuous LinkedIn connection. A recommendation from a defunct military contracting firm raised her eyebrows. Michael, peering over her shoulder, let out a low whistle. "That's not a typical recommendation," he muttered. Digging deeper, Elena uncovered a network of connections that began to paint a disturbing picture. The military contracting firm, Sentinel Global Solutions, had a history of questionable government contracts. Buried in archived news articles and court documents, she found hints of ethical violations that had been quietly swept under the rug. A burner phone, purchased with cash and registered to a dummy email, began to receive carefully planted queries. Elena's network of journalistic contacts was extensive and loyal. A former colleague who now worked in investigative data journalism shared a crucial piece of information. Richard Holloway had been involved in a sealed lawsuit 15 years ago related to a contract dispute that suggested more than just professional misconduct. The Oakwood Files website was taking shape. Carefully anonymized, meticulously designed to protect sources while exposing systemic issues, it became a digital lighthouse for frustrated homeowners. Each story was verified, each claim documented with the precision of a scientific journal. Sandra's sculpture removal, Robert's solar panel dispute, Elena's rose bush violation. These were no longer isolated incidents but part of a larger pattern of bureaucratic oppression. Michael watched his wife work, a mixture of admiration and concern crossing his weathered features. "You're walking a fine line," he warned. "These people don't play nice." Elena's smile was razor sharp. "Neither do I." The website's infrastructure was a masterpiece of digital protection. Hosted through multiple international servers, protected by layers of encryption that would challenge most cybersecurity experts, it was designed to be virtually untraceable. Each story came with documented evidence, property records, communication logs, photographic proof. But the digital warfare wasn't just defensive. Elena began to plant strategic information, subtle breadcrumbs that would catch the attention of local media, housing authorities, and potential legal resources. Each piece of information was a carefully crafted puzzle piece designed to create a narrative that couldn't be ignored. By midnight, the first version of the Oakwood Files was live. Within hours, the site had received over 500 unique visitors. Comments began to pour in, stories of similar experiences, offers of support, fragments of evidence from other homeowners who had felt silenced for years. Richard Holloway sat in his home office that same night, completely unaware that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. His computer screen displayed the HOA board's monthly report, a document that represented years of carefully maintained control. He had no idea that somewhere in the same suburban landscape, a revolution was being coded into existence, one line at a time. The rose bushes outside Elena's window seemed to sway with a hint of defiance, silhouetted against the moonlight, guardians of a growing rebellion. The first wave of retaliation came on a Tuesday morning, with military precision that would have made Michael proud and terrified. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to Elena's property at precisely 7:43 a.m. Two men in pressed suits stepped out, clipboards in hand, looking more like federal agents than the private investigators they actually were. Elena had been expecting them, her camera already positioned to capture every moment through the living room window. Richard Holloway had upped the ante. The investigators walked the property line with exacting movements, measuring the rose bushes, photographing every inch of the landscaping, and taking detailed notes. Elena watched, her fingers flying across her phone's screen, documenting, recording, archiving each moment of the intrusion. Michael, seated at the kitchen table, reviewed a series of encrypted messages from their growing network of resistance. "They've hired Sentinel Security Solutions," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Same firm that did some of their shadier military contracts. This isn't just about a violation anymore. This is personal." The Sentinel team spent 3 hours on the property. They measured the rose bushes multiple times, took soil samples, and even used what appeared to be professional-grade surveying equipment. Each movement was calculated, each measurement precise, a clear attempt to find any possible violation that could be leveraged against Elena. But Elena had been preparing for months. Every inch of her property had been meticulously documented. Professional landscaping reports, soil analysis from independent agronomists, historical property records, She had created a fortress of documentation that would make most legal teams weep with joy. By noon, the investigators left, their faces revealing a mixture of frustration and professional resignation. They knew they had been outmaneuvered. What they didn't know was that Elena had already begun her counteroffensive. The Oakwood Files website received an anonymous upload, a series of documents detailing Sentinel Security Solutions' questionable past. Military contract irregularities, allegations of inappropriate surveillance, a pattern of aggressive tactics that bordered on harassment. Sandra Martinez called that afternoon, her voice crackling with a mixture of anger and excitement. "They tried the same thing with me," she reported. "A team of inspectors showed up at my studio, claiming to be verifying some zoning regulation, but I recorded everything." Robert Chen had his own story. The solar panel installation had triggered a wave of inspections that seemed more like intimidation tactics than genuine regulatory oversight. "They're trying to create a chilling effect," he told Elena during their encrypted call. "Make everyone too scared to challenge them." But fear was not a language this group understood. Michael, drawing from his military intelligence background, helped Elena create a comprehensive defense strategy. They mapped out potential legal challenges, documented every interaction, and built a network of support that extended far beyond Oakwood Terrace. Local media began to take notice. An investigative reporter from the regional newspaper started making inquiries, sensing a story that went beyond a simple HOA dispute. By dinner time, the narrative had shifted. What was meant to be an intimidation tactic had become evidence of systematic harassment. The Oakwood Files website was now receiving hundreds of submissions from homeowners across 3 counties, each story adding another layer to the growing expose. Richard Holloway sat in his home office that evening, reviewing the day's reports. Something was happening, something he couldn't quite control. The perfect mechanism of suburban governance he had carefully constructed was developing cracks. Outside, Elena's rose bushes stood tall, 2 inches above regulation, a silent monument to resistance. The suburban war had truly begun. The old wooden box had been tucked away in the back of Michael's military footlocker, a relic from a past he rarely discussed. It was a Saturday afternoon when Elena found it, dust-covered and seemingly insignificant, wedged behind some old commendation medals and faded photographs. Her husband's military intelligence career was a landscape of carefully guarded secrets, stories that remained locked behind a wall of professional discretion. But this box, there was something different about it. The moment her fingers touched the worn leather, Michael appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Not everything can stay hidden forever," he said quietly. The contents were a meticulously organized collection of documents that would make any investigative journalist's heart race. Sealed court records, redacted military reports, and a series of interconnected files that painted a complex picture of Richard Holloway's past. Michael's connection to Holloway went deeper than Elena had imagined. During his final military intelligence assignment, he had been peripherally involved in an investigation that touched the edges of a contract dispute involving Sentinel Global Solutions, the same company that now provided security for the Oakwood Terrace HOA. Richard Holloway wasn't always Richard Holloway, Michael explained, spreading the documents across their dining room table. The original name was different, Thomas Richard Henderson. A detail changed through a legal name modification that raised more questions than answers. The sealed court records told a fragmented story. A military contract dispute from 15 years ago involved allegations of financial impropriety, unauthorized surveillance, and ethical violations that had been quietly suppressed. Holloway, or Henderson, had managed to navigate through the potential scandal with remarkable political maneuvering. Elena's investigative instincts were on high alert. "This isn't just about a local HOA," she muttered, connecting the documents with a series of red strings on a conspiracy board she had been maintaining in their basement. "This is about a pattern of systematic control." Michael's military contacts began to provide additional context. Discreet messages, carefully worded communications from old colleagues, painted a picture of a man who had perfected the art of bureaucratic manipulation. Holloway had a history of creating controlled environments, first in military contracting, now in suburban governance. The timing was crucial. Holloway's transition from military contracting to suburban HOA leadership wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated move, a continuation of a control methodology that had served him well in previous environments. He sees communities like military units, Michael explained. Hierarchy, strict control, elimination of individual expression. The HOA is just another command structure for him. Elena began to see the larger picture. The rose bush violation, Sandra's sculpture removal, Robert's solar panel dispute. These weren't random enforcement actions. They were calculated moves designed to maintain a specific type of suburban conformity. The most damning piece of evidence was a partially redacted document detailing a whistleblower complaint that had been mysteriously settled out of court. The complaint suggested a pattern of surveillance and intimidation that extended far beyond standard business practices. "This goes deeper than we thought," Elena said, her voice a mixture of excitement and concern. Michael's hand found hers. "Are you ready for what comes next?" The answer was in her eyes. The rose bushes outside seemed to stand as a testament to their growing resistance, 2 inches taller than regulation, a botanical symbol of defiance. The suburban rebellion had just found its most powerful weapon, the truth. Outside, the perfectly manicured streets of Oakwood Terrace waited, unaware that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. The Oakwood Terrace Community Center had never seen a turnout like this. Normally, the annual HOA meeting was a bureaucratic formality, a sea of beige and chalky, punctuated by monotonous discussions about lawn maintenance and trash collection schedules. Tonight was different. Every seat was filled, with residents standing along the walls, their collective energy crackling like static electricity. Elena arrived precisely at 6:45 p.m., her presentation meticulously prepared on a military-grade encrypted tablet. Michael sat in the back, his observant eyes scanning the room, old intelligence habits dying hard. Sandra Martinez was seated near the front, her latest sculpture, a delicate piece representing bureaucratic entanglement, carefully positioned to make a silent statement. Richard Holloway called the meeting to order, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness that hadn't been there in previous years. The room fell silent, but it was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. "Before we begin the standard agenda," Elena requested, rising from her seat, "I'd like to address some concerning matters regarding the HOA's recent practices." The digital presentation began. Each slide was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, carefully documented violations, patterns of selective enforcement, financial irregularities that dated back years, photographs of removed artwork, suppressed solar installations, and meticulously measured rose bushes filled the massive projection screen. Holloway's face transformed. The confident board president became a man visibly shrinking under the weight of evidence. "Let's talk about Thomas Richard Henderson," Elena continued, her voice calm and precise. "Or should I say Richard Holloway? The name change is interesting, especially considering the sealed military contract disputes from 15 years ago." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Residents who had previously been silent began to shift in their seats, smartphones already out, documenting every moment. Sandra stood up. "They removed my sculptures without any legitimate reason," she declared. "These weren't just decorations. They were artistic expressions protected under local public art ordinances." Robert Chen followed, presenting a detailed analysis of how the HOA's restrictions had prevented sustainable energy implementations. "Our neighborhood could have reduced carbon emissions by 22% with the solar installations they blocked," he stated, his engineering precision cutting through the room like a laser. One by one, homeowners began to share their stories. Years of suppressed frustration poured out, stories of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and systematic bullying. Michael had prepared the legal groundwork. Contacts from housing authorities, pro bono lawyers, and local media representatives were strategically placed throughout the room. What had begun as a simple HOA meeting was transforming into a public referendum on bureaucratic overreach. Holloway attempted to regain control, but his arguments crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. His carefully constructed facade of community leadership was dissolving in real time. The most devastating moment came when Alina revealed the connection between Sentinel Security Solutions and the HOA's aggressive enforcement tactics. Financial records, contract details, and a paper trail of intimidation tactics were projected for all to see. This isn't about maintaining property values, Alina concluded. This is about control, about suppressing individual expression and community creativity. By the meeting's end, the room was a mix of anger, revelation, and unexpected solidarity. Residents who had once been isolated in their frustrations now found themselves part of a collective movement. Outside, the streetlights of Oakwood Terrace cast long shadows. The perfectly manicured lawns seemed to whisper with the promise of change. Richard Holloway knew, in that moment, that everything was about to change. The suburban rebellion had found its voice. The State Housing Authority's conference room was a study in bureaucratic sterility, white walls, institutional furniture, and an atmosphere of calculated neutrality. Yet today, it hummed with an energy that suggested something momentous was about to happen. Alina sat at the center of a long mahogany table, Michael beside her, their presence a carefully orchestrated combination of professional precision and quiet determination. The documents they had meticulously collected over months were now spread out like a battle map, each page a piece of evidence, each folder a weapon in their campaign against the Oakwood Terrace HOA. Margaret Reyes, the lead investigator from the State Housing Authority, reviewed the compiled documentation with a growing sense of incredulity. Her glasses perched on the edge of her nose, fingers tracing the intricate web of financial records, violation notices, and documented patterns of harassment. "This goes beyond a typical HOA dispute," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone in the room. The investigation had multiple tentacles. The State Housing Authority was just one avenue. Pro bono lawyers had been drawn to the case like moths to a flame, seeing it as a potential landmark challenge to HOA overreach. Local media outlets were circling, sensing a story that was far more complex than a simple neighborhood dispute. Sandra Martinez's art removal became a focal point. A team of cultural preservation experts testified about the significance of public art and the legal protections surrounding artistic expression. Robert Chin's solar panel case attracted environmental lawyers who saw a broader fight against bureaucratic impediments to sustainable development. But the most devastating revelations came from Michael's carefully preserved military intelligence documents. The connection between Richard Holloway's past in military contracting and his current HOA leadership painted a chilling picture of systematic control. "It's a methodology," Michael explained, his military background evident in every measured word. "Create an environment of total compliance, suppressed individual expression, maintain control through bureaucratic intimidation." The legal team began to construct a multi-pronged approach. It wasn't just about challenging the HOA. It was about establishing legal precedents that would protect homeowners across the state. Unexpected allies emerged. Local architectural firms submitted statements about the HOA's detrimental impact on architectural innovation. Urban planners demonstrated how such restrictive policies stifle community creativity and property value development. Alina's investigative background proved crucial. She had documented everything, every communication, every violation, every seemingly minor interaction. The Oakwood Files website, which had started as a small act of resistance, now served as a comprehensive archive of evidence. The most stunning revelation came from a whistleblower within Sentinel Security Solutions. Anonymous documents revealed a systematic approach to HOA enforcement that went far beyond standard practices. Surveillance reports, intimidation tactics, financial kickbacks, the evidence was damning. "We're not just fighting a local HOA," Alina told the investigators. "We're exposing a system of bureaucratic control that extends far beyond Oakwood Terrace." As the day progressed, the scope of the investigation expanded. What had begun as Alina's personal resistance to a Rosebush violation had transformed into a comprehensive challenge to HOA governance models. Michael watched his wife with a mixture of pride and professional admiration. The strategic approach they had developed, part military precision, part investigative journalism, was bearing fruit. By late afternoon, multiple investigations were in motion. The state housing authority, local law enforcement, and federal regulatory bodies were all taking a hard look at the Oakwood Terrace HOA. Richard Holloway's carefully constructed world was crumbling, one document at a time. Outside, Alina's rose bushes continued to stand, 2 inches taller than regulation, a botanical symbol of resistance that had sparked a suburban revolution. The dissolution of the Oakwood Terrace Homeowners Association came not with a whimper, but with a profound transformation that would be studied in urban planning and community governance circles for years to come. Richard Holloway resigned in disgrace, his carefully constructed facade of community leadership reduced to a pile of legal documents and broken ambitions. The State Housing Authority's investigation had been thorough, exposing a network of manipulations that extended far beyond a simple suburban HOA. On a crisp autumn morning, Alina stood on her front porch, the rose bushes, still proudly 2 inches above regulation, swaying gently in the breeze. Michael joined her, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, their shared silence speaking volumes about their journey. The new HOA model that emerged was nothing short of revolutionary. Instead of a top-down governance structure, it became a truly democratic community organization. Sandra Martinez was elected to the board, her first initiative being a comprehensive public art program that celebrated individual creativity. Robert Chen's sustainable energy proposals became mandatory considerations for any new community development. "We didn't just fight," Alina told a local journalist during an interview that would be syndicated across the country. "We reimagined what community governance could look like." The legal repercussions were significant. Sentinel Security Solutions faced multiple investigations, with several of their contract practices coming under intense scrutiny. The company that had once specialized in intimidation tactics found itself on the defensive, a victim of its own systemic approach to control. Homeowners from across 3 counties began to reach out. The Oakwood Files, which had started as a small resistance website, transformed into a resource center for community empowerment. They published guides on HOA rights, provided legal resources, and created a support network for homeowners facing similar challenges. Michael's military contacts proved invaluable in developing these resources. His experience and intelligence translated into creating systems that protected individual rights while maintaining community standards. It was a delicate balance, one that required more nuance than simple enforcement. The most profound changes happened at the grassroots level. Neighborhoods began to re-examine their governance models. Community meetings became spaces of genuine dialogue rather than bureaucratic dictates. The idea of uniformity was replaced by a celebration of diversity, in landscaping, in architecture, in individual expression. Alina was ultimately asked to serve on the newly formed Community Governance Committee. She accepted, but with a specific condition. Transparency would be their primary operational principle. Every decision, every discussion would be documented and made available to all community members. "Power thrives in darkness," she would often say. Accountability requires light. The rose bushes became a local symbol of resistance. Other homeowners began to plant similar varieties, each bush a quiet rebellion against conformity. What had started as a personal act of defiance had become a community movement. Richard Holloway, now stripped of his positions and facing potential legal action, became a cautionary tale. His attempts to maintain control had ultimately led to his complete loss of influence. On the 1-year anniversary of the HOA transformation, the community held a celebration. Sandra's sculptures were reinstalled, this time with official support. Robert's solar panel design became a template for sustainable community development, and at the center of it all stood Alina and Michael, watching as their neighborhood had transformed from a place of rigid control to a vibrant, diverse community. 2 inches, Michael said, looking at the rose bushes, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Alina squeezed his hand. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. The suburban rebellion had succeeded, not through destruction, but through reimagination, not through anger, but through strategic, persistent hope. And it all began with 2 inches of roses.